Hello, Latin 4 scholars. Do you miss me? I miss you. So last week you started a poetry unit for me, and the first thing you guys did was you read a poem in English, which was called On Jupiter Place, and did a little bit of analysis of it. So we're starting off talking about narrative poetry, and that's just poetry that tells a story. I thought On Jupiter Place was pretty accessible as a poem. It didn't really seem to contain lots of weird, mystical ideas or anything like that. That sometimes, I don't know about you, but sometimes when I read a poem, I'm thinking, what in the world is going on? I thought it was pretty straightforward, and I hope that you guys agree. Now, I wanted to transition now to a poem in Latin by the Roman poet Catullus, who lived around the time of Julius Caesar. He lived from 85 BCE to 55 BCE, so only 30 years. And this first poem that we're going to read from it's actually his 53rd poem in his collection, is also sort of a short narrative poem. It just describes a situation, tells a funny little story, and it's done. So I thought that that's how we should begin talking about Latin poetry, and just to show you that it is not as hard as it seems. The only difficult thing about Latin poetry as opposed to Latin prose is that the word order is a little funky. Okay? So, what are we going to do right now? The first thing you should always do whenever you encounter real, authentic Latin from this point forward is you should read it aloud at least twice. And what are you paying attention to when you're reading it aloud? As you're reading it aloud, I want you to focus particularly on the way that words end, because as we know, Latin is all about the endings. And I also want you to pay attention to how the sentence is structured. Where do clauses begin? Where do they end? What verbs? Wow, you can tell I'm a Latin teacher. What verbs are there? What nouns are there? What endings of the verbs tell you the subject, etc.? So let's just do this. Let's read it aloud with me as we go along. Okay? Risi nescioquem modo e corona qui cum mirifice vatiniana meius crimina cavus explicasset admirans ait haec manusque tollens di magni salaputium desertum. And that's it. Just 5 lines. Okay, so let's reread that in Latin from start to finish. Risi nescioquem modo e corona qui cum mirifice vatiniana meus crimina cavus explicasset admirans ait haec manusque tollens di magni salaputium desertum. So some of the things that you might wonder is just taking a look at the sentence structure here. Who's the subject, right? Something we always want to look for. Who's the subject? Where are my verbs? You can tell that a character is speaking there by the quotation marks at the very end. Do we know who that character is? We do see some names here that might give us a clue, or it might not. Now, the first thing that I think that we should do when reading through a sentence is to look for clauses and to try and sort of see how the entire sentence flows together. So looking at the first 3 lines, Risi nescioquem modo e corona, qui cum mirifice vatiniana meus crimina cavus explicasset, and we'll stop there. Do we see a clause somewhere? Well, what are words that start off clauses? Well, there are words like qui, quae, quod. There's cum, which means when. Obviously, if cum is with and it's in a prepositional phrase, that's not starting a clause. So qui, quae, quod, cum, the word dum, D-U-M, which means while, or sometimes it means until. And then words like postquam, which means afterwards, things like that. All of those words start off clauses. So if we're looking just in the first 3 lines, I think that we see our first clause. See the word qui right here. Now I'm going to draw a bracket to indicate where a clause starts, and also I want to draw the close bracket as to where it ends. Now looking at this, you'll notice that qui starts a clause, but we just mentioned that the word cum, meaning when, can also start a clause. Now, looking at the word that comes after it, merifique, I can tell you that that's an adverb. You might be able to tell by the ending there. So therefore, since it's not an ablative noun, then cum is going to mean when, in this case. It's a circumstantial clause. So, oh my gosh, here we go. We have a clause within a clause. So, clauses always have to have verbs. So where does the circumstantial clause end? Well, we need to find a subjunctive verb, and we keep going along. What words here in this line look like a verb? And bam, explicacet. See the S-S-E followed by a T. There we go, explicacet. So, this helps us figure out where the circumstantial clause is. But do we know where this qui clause ends? Well, we just need to go find some verbs, and that'll tell us where it ends. And, oh gosh, where do we have our verbs? Do we see any verbs? Well, I will go ahead and tell you that the word ite, right here, ite is a main verb of the clause. And this is my really bad way of writing it. MVOC. Oh gosh, that's terrible. Look at that. Not good. Okay. I probably should just, you know what, I'm just going to highlight that. Hold on one second. Undo that. Yep. Nah. Okay. Highlighter. Okay. What I'm going to do is I'm going to highlight the verbs here. Okay, see it right there? Ite. That's the main verb of the qui clause. And but we have to see this que here, which means and then going up to the colon. Well, the clause is actually going to end all the way down here. Okay? So, what that means is that in the first 4 lines, the independent thought of the sentence is contained solely in the first line, which tells us that there has to be a verb somewhere in this first line. Now, looking at this first line, what do we notice? Do we notice any prepositional phrases, for example? I would hope so. A corona is a prepositional phrase. I tend to underline prepositional phrases, so there you go. Now, what else do we see? We see the word risi. It ends in the letter I. Comes from a verb, rideo, ridere, risi. And so I'm just going to go ahead and tell you that this is the main verb right here of the entire sentence, and really of the entire poem. And any other words that we can really identify? You don't know what you know what nescio means. It means I don't know. But when nescio is combined with quem, you don't quite know what that means yet, and that's okay. Modo, you know, is an adverb that means just now or recently. So, at this point, we've identified that risi is the main verb of the sentence. If you look at the letter I, who is the subject? Well, think about your songs. Iestiet emusistis erunt, erunt. Iestiet emusistis erunt, erunt. Iestiet emusistis erunt is the perfect tense. It's translated as verb. Duh. So therefore, the subject would be I. Okay, so the subject of this entire poem is I. Who is I? I don't know. It's just the speaker of the poem. Is it Catullus? Maybe. Maybe not. Okay, so in the independent thought, we've identified that the subject is I. Whoa. And the main verb is risi. And we have a prepositional phrase, and we're not going to worry about these other 3 words for right now. Now, looking in the qui, you notice how qui is followed immediately by the circumstantial clause. Let's start with the circumstantial clause first. Look at the words in it. Cum merifique vatiniana meius crimina cavus explicasset. Looking solely at the endings of the words. We're not translating anything, just looking solely at the endings. Does anything trigger subject or nominative case to you? I would hope so. let's see here. Can I find a different color to let's try, oh, my old pal orange. Okay, I would hope that you guys would see that meus and Catullus, they both end in US. Those look pretty nominative to me. So my Calvus is going to be the subject of this circumstantial clause. Okay? We already know, because we talked about it a minute ago, that explicasset is the subjunctive verb inside this circumstantial clause. And explicasset kind of looks a little weird. Normally you would expect an ISSE, and in fact explicasset is a contracted form. Yes, the Romans had contractions as well. And I'm going to insert a little text box over here, and the uncontracted form would be explicavit, like that. Now, why in the world would a poet choose to say explicasset as opposed to explicaviset? Well, the poets had to fit their words into strict meters, and there was no such thing as free verse, right? So think about it. Explicasset is 4 syllables. Explicaviset is 5. So in that line, Catullus needed only a 4-syllable word to close it out, and so he chose to contract a few letters in explicaviset. But there it is. That's a pluperfect subjunctive verb, had explained. Now, what words are left? Well, we know cum means when, and mirifique, that looks like marvelously or something like that. Now, we have vatiniana and crimina. You know crimina from last year. You had that word toward the end when we talked about the trial of Salvius. So crimen, criminus, is a neuter noun, and each and every day neuter plurals end in a. Each and every day neuter plurals end in a. So I'm going to choose to highlight these 2 words in a different color. Vatiniana and crimina, those 2 words go together. And since we already have a subject, meus Catullus, and we have a verb, these 2 words must be accusative, direct object. We don't really know what vatiniana means. We'll get to that in just a little bit. Crimina, though, if you'll recall, means charges. So, now that that circumstantial clause is done with, let's take a look at the qui clause in general. Now, does anything look nominative to you? Take a second to look. You might notice 2 words that happen to look verby in the front, nouny in the back. The grand mullet of Latin grammar, of course, is a participle. And there are 2 nominative singular participles in this line. And if you'll recall, nominative singular present participles end in ns as a nominative singular. So, admirans and tollens are both nominative singular. Since they're participles, they're adjectives, and they're describing whoever the subject is of this qui clause, whoever this qui is referring to. And we don't know who that is yet, but we will very soon. Eit ends in a t. That is the verb. You may not know what that means yet either, and that's okay. Haik you recognize, of course. Manus, you know that means hands. So, and then we're not going to go to the quotation marks just yet. Now that we have kind of looked at, I'm going to go ahead and highlight these in some sort of orangey-ish, salmon-ish, whatever this is, color, so that you can tell that those are both nominative as well. Now let's go back and look at the independent thought. Since we've marked off the first 4 lines, only at this point should you then be looking up the words. I know that the temptation is to simply look at the words, look them up one by one in a dictionary. But you have to break yourselves of that habit, okay? You have to start looking at the sentence as a whole and paying attention to the endings, figuring out, sort of drawing yourself a roadmap, and then you look up the words that you don't know. And then it's all so easy because you've drawn yourself a roadmap, so to speak. So looking at this poem, looking at the first line, words you don't know. You know that nescio means I don't know, but I think I told you on the cheat sheet that I gave you that nescio quem, those two words go together, and that means literally I don't know who. In other words, somebody or other, okay? See how quem ends in an em? So this is going to tell us that nescio quem is going to be an accusative direct object here. Okay? So, risi means I laughed. I laughed at somebody or other just now. E corona, look up corona. What do you see? It means from the audience or from the crowd. So I laughed at somebody or other recently from the crowd. Who? Now who do you think the qui is referring to? Is it referring to I? Probably not. It's referring to nescio quem, this person who did something, right? So I laughed at somebody or other just now from the crowd who, when, and now go to my subject inside the circumstantial clause, when my Calvus had explained marvelously the charges, and then I give you what Vatiniana means. It means of Vatinius, and Vatinius was a politician who was prosecuted by none other than a guy named Gaius Licinius Calvus, who happened to be a close friend of Catullus. So when my Calvus had explained marvelously the charges of Vatinius, admirans. Who do you think admirans and tolens are referring to? We already know that those are nominative singular, and they're referring to whoever qui is referring to, and qui is referring to nescio quem. So I laughed at somebody or other who, admirans, admiring these, meaning these words, or admiring, he said these words, and tolens, lifting up his hands. Okay, so probably admirans haec, actually, admiring these things and lifting up his hands. Eit, he said. Eit is a strange verb that you're going to see quite a lot of in poetry, not so much in prose. So, starting over, I laughed at somebody or other recently from the crowd who, when my Calvus had explained marvelously the charges of Vatinius, admiring these things and lifting up his hands, he said, De magni, we know what that means, great gods, salaputium desertum. Now, what's missing in this last line? Great gods, salaputium desertum. If you said verb, you are correct. There is no verb. So, what do we have to do when there's no verb? Oh gosh, there you go. We have to add in, usually, the verb est. I'm doing this without the Promethean pen. It's a long story. Just bear with me. So there we go. De magni salaputium est desertum. Now, I give you on the cheat sheet that salaputium means like a little runt or little squirt. Great gods, the little squirt is, and then desertum, I tell you, means articulate. So great gods, the little squirt is articulate. So you're probably thinking, what is going on exactly with this poem? So we have the speaker. You probably figured out where is he. He is at a court of law, a court session. What's going on? His friend, the speaker's friend, Calvus, is prosecuting a guy named Vatinius. And the speaker of the poem hears somebody or other who was mesmerized by Calvus's prosecution, he hears this somebody or other just yell out, "Great gods, the little squirt is eloquent." Wow. Well, that's interesting. How's that funny? Well, it's just a funny little story. But how is it really funny? And here's the thing. It all involves kind of this word right here, salaputium, which we'll talk about in just a second. So I'm going to go back to the very beginning and just translate the whole thing, read through it again. I laughed at somebody or other who just now from the crowd who, when my Calvus had explained the Vatinian crimes or charges, or the charges of Vatinius, marvelously, admiring these things and lifting up his hands, he said, "Great gods, the little squirt is eloquent." Now we know that Calvus in real life was short, and apparently he was also notorious for kind of being, oh boy, I don't know, a womanizer, a player. And in fact, the word salaputium, little squirt, little runt, has a connotation of lechery, if I can use that word. If you don't know what lechery is, just look it up. And yes, there is a sexual connotation to it. So there you go, your first dirty word in Latin. I don't feel so bad about teaching that to you because this poem actually was on the AP syllabus for like 30 years. So there you go. An interesting little description about a guy named Calvus at a court hearing. Just telling a quick story, and I hope I haven't like completely bored you all to death, but I think it's important to do this, to work through it, so that you guys can see how the words in Roman poems often are split apart from each other. But once you read enough of these poems, I think you're going to be able to figure it out pretty quickly. So that's all for now. Take care.